I let my cheating wife think she was getting half of everything in the divorce, until she realized I'd hidden the real assets. The morning I found the texts on her phone, my world collapsed in a way I never thought possible. We'd been married for 12 years, built what I thought was a solid life together, and suddenly I'm staring at messages between her and some guy from her gym talking about weekend getaways and how much they missed each other. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through months of conversations, each one feeling like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I sat on our kitchen counter for what felt like hours, just trying to process what I was seeing. The coffee maker was still brewing, making those familiar morning sounds that suddenly felt foreign and wrong. Everything in our house looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. The photos of us on vacation, the little notes she used to leave me, the shared Netflix account with our mixed-up watch history, it all felt like evidence of a life that had been built on lies. That first week was probably the darkest period of my adult life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and going to work felt like performing in a play where I'd forgotten all my lines. My colleagues kept asking if I was feeling all right, and I'd just nod and mumble something about being tired. Inside, I was screaming. The betrayal felt like a physical weight sitting on my chest, making it hard to breathe properly. But somewhere around day 10, something shifted. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, and I realized I wasn't just heartbroken anymore, I was furious. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that makes you want to throw things, but something colder and more calculating. She'd made her choice, and now I was going to make mine. I started paying attention to things I'd never bothered with before. Our joint bank account, the investments we'd made together, the way our assets were structured. We'd always handled money as a team, but I'd been the one who actually managed most of the financial decisions. She knew we had savings and retirement funds, but she'd never really dug into the details. That's when I realized I had options she probably wasn't even aware of. The first thing I did was start moving money, but not in the way you might think. I wasn't hiding existing assets, that would have been illegal and stupid. Instead, I started being very strategic about how I handled new income and investments. I opened accounts she didn't know about, started funneling money into investment vehicles that weren't immediately obvious, and began building a financial foundation that existed outside our marriage. I also started documenting everything. Every late night she claimed to be working, every weekend trip with friends that I now suspected weren't just friends, every lie she told me about her schedule. I wasn't planning to use it all in court, but I wanted to have a clear picture of what had been happening and when. The betrayal was deeper than I'd initially realized, stretching back almost 2 years. Meanwhile, she was acting like everything was normal. She'd come home from what I now knew were dates with him, kiss me hello, and ask about my day. She'd suggest we plan a vacation together or talk about home improvement projects. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could someone compartmentalize their life so completely? How could she look me in the eye and discuss our future while actively planning to destroy it? I started working longer hours, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't stand being in the house with her. Every conversation felt like a performance, every shared meal felt like a lie. I'd catch myself analyzing everything she said, looking for clues or contradictions. When she mentioned a new restaurant she wanted to try, I'd wonder if she'd already been there with him. When she bought new clothes, I'd question whether they were really for me or for someone else. The hardest part was maintaining the facade. I couldn't let her know that I knew, not yet. I needed time to get my financial house in order, to make sure I was protected before everything exploded. So I played the role of the oblivious husband, even as every interaction felt like swallowing glass. I'd smile and nod when she talked about her day, knowing that half of what she was telling me was fabricated. After about 6 months of this double life, I'd managed to accumulate a significant amount of assets that weren't technically marital property. I'd been careful to use only money I earned after discovering her affair, and I'd structured everything through legitimate investment vehicles and business arrangements. It wasn't about being vindictive, it was about protecting myself from someone who had already shown they couldn't be trusted. That's when the first major plot twist happened. She came home one evening and told me she wanted a divorce. Not because she'd been caught, not because she felt guilty, but because she decided she wanted to be with him. She sat me down in our living room, the same room where we'd watched countless movies together, and told me she wasn't happy anymore, that she needed space to figure out what she wanted. I almost laughed. After months of knowing about her affair, after months of watching her lie to my face, she was going to frame this as her decision to leave an unsatisfying marriage. The audacity was breathtaking. But I just nodded sadly and told her I understood, that I wanted her to be happy. I could see the relief in her eyes, probably thinking this was going to be easier than she'd expected. We started the divorce process, and she was remarkably cooperative. She suggested we handle things amicably, split everything down the middle, and move on with our lives. She even offered to let me keep the house if I wanted it, probably because she was planning to move in with him anyway. I agreed to everything, playing the role of the hurt but reasonable ex-husband who just wanted to get through this with minimal drama. Her lawyer was clearly impressed with how civilized we were being. Most divorces involve fighting over every piece of furniture and every dollar in the bank account, but we were dividing things up like we were splitting a restaurant bill. She got half of our joint savings, half of our retirement accounts, and half of the value of our shared investments. On paper, it looked like a perfectly fair split. What she didn't realize was that the accounts she knew about represented maybe 30% of my actual assets. While she was getting half of our visible wealth, I was walking away with significantly more than she could even imagine. The money I'd been moving and investing during those months of pretending everything was fine had grown into something substantial. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in October. We stood in the courthouse, signed the papers, and shook hands like business partners concluding a deal. She seemed almost giddy with relief, probably thinking about how she could finally be open about her relationship. I was calm, knowing that my financial future was secure in ways she couldn't comprehend. But then came the second twist, the one that changed everything again. About 2 weeks after our divorce was final, she called me crying. Not the manipulative kind of crying she'd sometimes done during our marriage, but genuine, desperate sobbing. Her boyfriend had left her. Not for another woman, but because he'd gotten a job opportunity across the country and didn't want to be tied down to a relationship. The irony was devastating. She'd thrown away our marriage for someone who saw her as disposable. She'd blown up 12 years of partnership for a guy who wouldn't even consider taking her with him when he moved. The man she'd been willing to divorce me for had essentially told her she wasn't worth the inconvenience of a long-distance relationship. She wanted to talk, to explain, to somehow make sense of what had happened. She came over to what had been our house, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She told me about the affair as if I didn't already know. She talked about how confused she'd been, how she'd thought she was in love, how she'd convinced herself that leaving me was the right thing to do. I listened without saying much. Part of me felt sorry for her. She'd lost her marriage and her affair partner in the span of a few weeks. But mostly I felt a strange sense of closure. This was the woman who had lied to me for 2 years, who had planned our divorce while I was still believing we had a future together. Her pain was real, but it was also the natural consequence of choices she'd made. Then she asked the question I'd been expecting. She wanted to know if there was any chance we could work things out. Not immediately, she said, but maybe over time. Maybe we could go to counseling, try to rebuild what we'd had. She talked about how she'd realized what she'd lost, how she understood now that what we'd had was real and valuable. I told her no as gently as I could. Not because I was trying to punish her, but because I genuinely couldn't imagine trusting her again. The betrayal had changed something fundamental in me. Even if I could forgive her, I couldn't forget what she was capable of. I couldn't live with someone knowing they'd already shown they could lie to me for years and plan to leave me while sharing my bed. She cried harder then, asking if I'd ever loved her at all. That question hit me unexpectedly hard because the answer was yes. I had loved her completely and without reservation. I'd trusted her with my heart, my future, my dreams. That love was exactly why her betrayal had been so devastating. You can't hurt someone that badly unless they've given you the power to do it. The conversation ended with her leaving, and I haven't seen her since. I heard through mutual friends that she moved back in with her parents for a while, then eventually found her own place. She's apparently dating someone new now, though I don't know any details and don't want to. That part of my life is closed, filed away like a book I've finished reading. The final twist came about a year later, when I was finally ready to start dating again. I met someone through a hiking group I'd joined, someone who had no connection to my previous life. We'd been seeing each other for a few months when she mentioned that she'd gone through a difficult divorce a few years earlier. Her ex-husband had been having an affair with a coworker, and she'd found out through social media posts. What struck me about her story was how different her approach had been. She'd confronted him immediately, demanded they go to counseling, and when he refused to end the affair, she'd filed for divorce right away. She'd been angry and hurt, but she'd also been decisive. She hadn't played games or tried to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Listening to her talk about her experience made me reflect on my own choices. I'd spent months planning and positioning myself financially while pretending everything was fine. I'd been strategic where she'd been direct, calculating where she'd been emotional. I'm not sure either approach was right or wrong. They were just different ways of handling betrayal. What I learned from the whole experience was that betrayal changes you in ways you don't expect. It's not just about the immediate pain of discovery or the logistics of ending a relationship. It's about realizing that someone you trusted completely was capable of living a double life. It makes you question your own judgment, your ability to read people, your understanding of what relationships actually mean. I also learned that revenge isn't as satisfying as you might think it would be. Yes, I came out of the divorce in a better financial position than my ex-wife realized. Yes, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that I'd protected myself while she was planning to leave me. But it didn't undo the betrayal or make the pain go away. It just meant I had more resources to rebuild my life. The money I'd accumulated during those months of pretending helped me buy a new house, take some trips I'd always wanted to take, and invest in experiences that helped me move forward. But the real healing came from other things, from reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during my marriage, from discovering new interests and hobbies, from slowly learning to trust people again. I don't regret the choices I made during the divorce. I protected myself financially, which gave me options and security as I rebuilt my life. I avoided a prolonged legal battle that would have been expensive and emotionally draining for both of us. And I maintained enough dignity and self-control to end things on my own terms, rather than letting anger and hurt drive my decisions. But I also recognized that my approach wasn't necessarily noble or admirable. I was hurt and angry, and I acted in ways that prioritized my own interests over any possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. Maybe there was a version of events where we could have worked through the betrayal, where the marriage could have survived and even been strengthened by the crisis. I'll never know because I chose a different path. I chose to protect myself rather than fight for us. I chose to plan my exit rather than demand answers. I chose to let her think she was leaving me rather than confronting her about what I knew. Those choices made sense to me at the time, and I think they were probably the right ones for who I am and what I could handle. The woman I'm with now knows about my previous marriage, though not all the details about how I handled the divorce. She knows I was betrayed and that it took me time to trust again. She's been patient with my occasional moments of doubt or insecurity, understanding that some wounds take time to fully heal. What's interesting is that I'm probably a better partner now than I was before. The experience taught me to pay attention to red flags, to communicate more directly about my needs and concerns, and to not take trust for granted. I'm more careful with my heart, but I'm also more intentional about how I show love and commitment. I still think about my ex-wife sometimes, usually when I'm making financial decisions or when I hear songs that remind me of our early years together. I don't wish her harm, but I don't wish her well either. She's just part of my past now, someone who taught me important lessons about trust, betrayal, and the importance of protecting yourself when someone shows you they can't be trusted. The divorce settlement we agreed to probably seemed fair to her at the time, and in many ways it was. She got half of what she knew about, which was a reasonable split of our visible assets. The fact that I had other resources she wasn't aware of wasn't her fault. It was just a consequence of the choices she'd made and the time I'd had to prepare for our inevitable separation. Looking back, I think the most important thing I learned was that you can't control other people's choices, but you can control how you respond to them. My ex-wife chose to have an affair, chose to lie to me for 2 years, and chose to frame our divorce as her decision to leave an unsatisfying marriage. I chose to protect myself financially, chose to avoid a messy legal battle, and chose to let her live with the consequences of her decisions. Neither of us was perfect in how we handled the end of our marriage. But we both made choices that reflected our values and priorities at the time. She prioritized her immediate happiness and new relationship over our marriage and shared history. I prioritized my financial security and emotional protection over any possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. The money I protected during the divorce has given me options and security that I'm grateful for. But more importantly, the experience taught me that I'm stronger and more resilient than I thought I was. I survived the betrayal, navigated the divorce, and built a new life that's probably happier and more authentic than the one I had before. That's not to say I'm glad it happened. I wouldn't wish betrayal on anyone, and there are still moments when I grieve for the marriage I thought I had. But I'm proud of how I handled a difficult situation, and I'm grateful for the lessons I learned about trust, self-protection, and the importance of building a life that doesn't depend entirely on another person's choices.